Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Your Next 50 podcast. Ladies, we're here to tell you it is your time. Be intentional with your choices. Don't waste one more day hiding in your stories. It's time to reclaim your personal power, use your voice, and be happy while doing it. This podcast is going to show you how. And today we are honored and privileged to have a wonderful guest with us, Shari Graydon, who is an author and speaker, an advocate of women. And Jenny, you had a story that you wanted to start us off with and how you know Shari.
Well, welcome, Shari. And in a minute, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself. But I have to tell you a story because that's what we do on this podcast. I was at an Association of Fundraising Professionals conference. This is quite a few years back, Shari. And there were women that were there that were handing out these business cards that said, own your expertise. Here's a website you can go to, find out more about informed opinions. And my first thought was, first of all, what a fantastic name, Informed Opinions. And I remember hearing you speak. And to be honest, I can't remember all of the details, but what really stuck with me when I heard you was the way you described because I've had this experience where they announced Jenny Mitchell on the stage, they read her entire fancy bio. And then by the time you get up there, you have one of two ways it's going to go. And your advice was to deflect, to take a moment to say, well, that was me then, or to take a moment to say, a humorless deflection, because women couldn't own it was challenging for women to own from the podium their power. And I have taken that information to heart and I have used it myself from the podium. So Shari, first of all, thank you for all the advice you've given women already in your life. And please introduce yourself to our readers and to our listeners. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be with you both. And I guess I would say, with regards to self-introductions and introductions generally, that my default is to under-promise and over-deliver. And so I object to the long bio, first of all, because nobody's really interested in your resume.
Yeah.
They can all go to LinkedIn for that. And if you are on a podium, people have already seen your bio. And so, and by way of self-introduction, what I do in workshops where there's nobody there to introduce me is I sneak in references to establish my credibility in subordinate clauses. So I'll say something like, although I've done hundreds and hundreds of media interviews myself, I'm going to start with a story about the one that I turned down and why that was a problem. So, and then I tell the story, and the story is funny and relevant, but I've demonstrated my expertise by saying, although I've done hundreds and hundreds of media interviews. So, my impact introduction, which is something else I encourage women to do, is not to give the title and affiliation necessarily if you're meeting people for the first time, because if they don't know your organization and they don't know what your title does, that
doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. So my self-intro is, I'm Shari Graydon, and I train smart women to speak up to make Canada more democratic. And that's the alternative to I'm the catalyst of Informed Opinions. But it allows people to picture me training smart women to speak up and hopefully making Canada more democratic.
And how did you learn how to do that, Shari?
Trial and error. Probably really from being in rooms with really smart women over the past 13 years since I started Informed Opinions, and asking them to quickly introduce themselves and hearing them do the business card intro, name, title, affiliation, and also knowing that those intros didn't give me a fraction of a glimpse into the impact they were actually having in the world. And the impact they were having in the world was so much more interesting than their title. So that was one thing. And then also being on planes or at a cocktail reception and introducing myself and seeing people's eyes glaze over. Yeah. And realizing that if I start with, I train smart women to speak up, I'm either going to get a response that is, well, oh, that's so important. Thank God you're doing that. Or aren't there enough mouthy women already speaking up? What do we need that for? And either way, it's the start of a very interesting
But
conversation.
they were listening to you, weren't they? As a
Mhm.
visibility coach, Shari, I work a lot with women
Mhm.
and on speaking up and using their
Mhm.
voices and getting out there, showing up powerfully. And networking is one of them. And you've talked about that.
Mhm.
I love that one-liner that grabs people's attention, because why do people not like the networking? All the women I work with, they tell me, "Oh, I don't like to brag about myself. I don't," and but they're talking about that long form bio, and I'm like, "No, it is not that." So I love Jenny and I are going to
Mhm.
work on our one sentence bios now going after this.
Mhm.
Um, you talk a lot about, I mean, your informed opinions.org organization talks about women in the media, and you have a platform, a system that calculates how many, citations women have. And the stats, I was quite surprised actually,
Mhm.
by how low they are. And there is a recent Devoir study here, the French newspaper Devoir came out with a study for the pandemic, and they stated that they did the similar exercise, and they came out with 36% of the COVID-19
Mm.
stats were by women here in Quebec, and which is not very far off from you saying, in your stats are 30 to 32%,
Mm.
which is higher than it was when you started, I believe.
Yeah, but not
Where
enough.
do we not enough? Like, I
Yeah.
was just so surprised. It really stunned me.
Mm.
What is the and I know you've written books on this, but we have a short time together. Why are women, what are the
Mm.
women saying to you that is stopping them from
Mm.
showing up?
Yeah. So first of all, it's actually not on women. We train women to speak up and say yes, but it's no longer on women. So the default of most journalists on deadline is to call a source that they know, somebody that they
Yeah.
have interviewed before, that's in their Rolodex already, that they know will respond. So women are not in those Rolodexes,
Okay.
metaphorical or otherwise, as much, because it's a self-perpetuating cycle. If
Right.
you're not already in the media, you're not in the public eye, you're not thought of, you're not called, and that's self-perpetuating. So women get asked less often, and yes, we decline more often, but over the past 13 years, we've trained 5,000 women.
Yeah.
So yes, we have more than 2,000 women in our database of experts who have said to us, yes, when journalists call me, I will respond.
Mhm.
So there are a number of factors. Women's reluctance to be in the spotlight, knowing that they will be criticized more heavily and for different, irrelevant things than their male colleagues. Those are all relevant
Mm.
pieces. But on top of that, there is the default to reliable or known sources, and there's also the default to official sources. So, if you are the Minister of Defense, you're going to get called more so
Yeah.
than somebody who's not, and so that's also part of it. But the argument that we make with journalists is that there are entire realms of human experience that are not going to be reflected if you are not interviewing women, and women are as or more impacted by government decisions on many fronts than their male colleagues. And so you cannot call Canada a democracy if women are not at 50% in legislatures and parliament, and if we're not being quoted and having our voices influence public conversations as much as men.
Mic drop right there. And what I appreciated is the data. And I told Sylvia that this was going to be a conversation about deconstructing the why, and the solutions you've put forward. And love Sylvia has a great story about op-eds, because that's one of the things you teach women to do, is to write op-eds. But Sylvia, you were telling us before the show about JP's
Yeah,
grandfather.
my husband's grandfather, who is not with us anymore, but I remember him 20 years ago. Every time I would see him, every couple of weeks, I wrote to La Presse and I wrote to Le Devoir, and I was so upset with this. And he was writing every single week. And generation, I mean, he would be in his 90s now. My husband has learned to do that as well, not on a weekly basis, but he often writes Tout le Devoir and gets published all the time. Whenever he writes something, he is published. Meanwhile, me, I'm always saying, oh, I should write a letter to I should really write a letter. I should. And I don't. Time-wise, I don't feel, it's not that I wouldn't be heard, but there are reasons I think it's time for me that I just don't. I have all these ideas and I want to respond. But JP, when he takes the time, he does so. Now, we were talking about generations, and then it got us to speaking about newspapers versus more newer media where women perhaps are more present. But it's very interesting that
well, I want to pick up on what you said about time, because I gave you the short version of why women are underrepresented. The reason women don't write op-eds is because they don't friggin' have time.
I don't.
Because they have full-time jobs. If they're in a position where they have an informed opinion about whatever, economics or the environment or military or mining, if they have an informed opinion, the likelihood is that they are mid-career or late career. They have kids. They are holding down a full-time job as well as managing caregiving responsibilities, potentially on two fronts, elder and kids. And they don't, they're going to prioritize people over profile. And so one of the things that we do at Informed Opinions in the op-ed writing workshop is give people an approach that makes it much faster. So when I first started writing op-eds and columns, I would get angry about something. I would bang away at my computer for 3 hours. I would have a hot, wet mess. And then I would spend another 4 hours massaging it into a coherent argument. I can now get angry about something, email an editor at 8:30 and promise a polished op-ed by 11, and then I can deliver that. And that's partly what we teach, is how to approach it so that you're not flailing away in
simplifying the process. Yes. Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious. I'm always interested in themes and trends. Tell me about the kinds of women who show up in your leadership, in your training courses, and the kind of women that take your programs, Shari. What's the commonalities?
The commonalities really are that they have an informed opinion that somebody has convinced them can contribute and make a difference and make an impact. Right. So we have lawyers and accountants and academics and nonprofit leaders, really across the entrepreneurs, across the spectrum. And what unites them is knowing something deeply and realizing that as a result of that knowledge and that experience, they have insights that can contribute to either our collective understanding of an intractable social, economic, or environmental issue, or a solution, or a program, or a proposal, or an idea that other people will benefit from. And realizing that, okay, I can talk to my neighbors or my book club or my colleagues, but having an amplified voice significantly increases your profile, and that, to the work that you both do, that gives you entree to bigger arenas where you have the opportunity to increase your impact.
It's like eyeballs. We talk about eyeballs, right? Access and eyeballs are two really important things. Sorry, Sylvia.
No, I was interested in the question of age. Do you see that the women joining you are of a certain age?
I would say the age range goes from 25 to 55. So we have graduate students who participate. We partner a lot with universities, and they will put scholars in a room, and many of them will be tenured or aspiring profs, but many of them will also be grad students.
Which is wonderful, wonderful. The reason I ask is because we talk a lot about imposter syndrome and women feeling judged, feeling, the fear of showing up powerfully. And the women in my circles, I've had the opportunity to work with some very powerful women, leaders of universities, friends of mine who are leading political parties here in Quebec, associations. We had Valérie Pisano on our show a little while ago. She runs Mila, which is artificial intelligence. So they are very public. I see their names all the time. I listened to a podcast episode this weekend by Liz Plank, who is also an advocate and has written books on male toxicity. And she's quite young. She's 35, but she was on this episode talking about how she herself has self-sabotaged her dream jobs because she did not feel up to the plate. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if these women of such, they are so visible, so powerful, what does it leave the rest of us who, we create our own platforms, but is that a feeling? That's a feeling I feel across the board. I was wondering what your experience there, Shari, was.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And we are actually working with Bibi Hales to do a workshop building on the work that she's already doing. One of the things that we remind women all the time is that, you need to stop, you need to shut down that voice in your head that gives you all the reasons why you're not good enough. And one of the ways to do that is to think about responding to requests or applying for jobs as if you were a reasonable white man. So, the fact that we hold ourselves to this higher standard of authority and credibility is doing a disservice to us. And so on the interview front, because many women turn down interviews or speaking opportunities by saying, I'm really not the best person. And so we encourage them to replace that phrase, I'm not the best person, with here's what I could talk about. And the reminder is that, take 10 minutes if you need to. Say to the journalist or the conference organizer, I'm just in the middle of something. What are you looking for? I'll call you back. And then draw the Venn diagram.
Yeah.
That is what they want in one circle and what you know in another. And you look at the sweet spot of the intersection, because there will be one or you wouldn't have been called. And then you say, here's what value I can add, because that's what it's about. It's not, are you the best person? It's, can you add value? And the other thing that's really critical is to remember that if you say no, or if you don't apply for the job, a reasonable white man, or maybe the unreasonable white man, he's going to say yes. And he's going to get the opportunity to reach 100,000 people or 5,000 people, whatever it is. And you're going to watch him and realize, well, I could have done that.
Yes.
So it's really,
on the job front, it's interesting because we tend, I think, as women, the stats is like, we will not apply for a job unless we have 100% or near 100% of all the qualifications asked. While men will apply, I think it's something like 60 to 70%, and they'll still apply for it. And I'm assuming that goes, that's our reason for, oh yeah, I don't know much about this. So I don't know everything about this. I can't possibly be interviewed on this. But I love how you reframe that and opening up the opportunities for us with what we do know. I love that.
There's something you said, Shari, in your BBG on her Speaking with Women podcast has a wonderful interview with you, that if you're enjoying this podcast with Shari, there's lots more great content out there. And what I always come back to on that same subject is, if I pass this up, how am I letting down all the next women who might get called? And I have to say, as a coach, sometimes I find executives will, they might not do it for themselves, but they'll always stand up for their staff. They'll always stand up for their team. And so that little stretch moment is much bigger than you. I think that was the language you used. Would you say that's true, Shari?
Oh, that's a critical factor. So many women we deal with, they're not looking to be the center of attention. They're not looking for the limelight. And there's also a layer of, well, I can't promote myself. You talked about that at the beginning. And so what overcomes that is that bigger picture. And, one of the examples that I've found inspirational is looking at Hillary Clinton during 2016 election and wondering every day, how does she get out of bed in the morning, given the onslaught that's coming at her? And I think the answer was really clear. It's because she understood in a deep way the policy implications of women not being present. And she knew that she could make a difference because she had been making a difference for 20 years. And so bringing it back for women always to that, what is going to continue to be missing if your voice is not there, if your experience is not reflected. One of the things we did early on at Informed Opinions, before we created the Gender Gap Tracker, and when we were really just doing media interviews and talking to journalists one-on-one, was we took 100 op-eds written by women we had trained that were published in the Globe and Le Devoir and mainstream media. We created a word cloud to see what issues came up when women were writing. And then we created a similar word cloud for men, deducted the common words, and we're left with issues that if women's voices are not present, these issues don't get discussed. And I would say that word cloud is as motivational as anything I've ever said in a keynote presentation, because women look at the issues, and some of them are predictable women's issues, but many of them are not. Many of them are things like racism and police, food and water, evident impact. And women are driven, not all women, of course, and not all men. I'm making these vast generalizations, but women spend most of our lives either trying to avoid becoming pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or dealing with the consequences of having been pregnant, which change everything. So
it really does. We did an episode, Jenny, it's reminding me of our episode on the redefining the word power.
Yes.
And how women shy away from positions of power. And not every woman, of course, but in general, we don't have a great connection with that word. And it brought me to that word expert, authority. And I think what we came out with when we spoke about that power paradigm was having that impact. When women can be called to have impact on our communities, then we are speaking up, and you'll have the raise of hands, right? Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's all about power too, as opposed to power over. And we're so used to thinking of power over as opposed to power to.
Yep.
Kim Campbell had a really good quote. I'm not going to remember it explicitly, but a number of years ago, she talked about the fact that, if you did have power and you could make change for good, of course you would want to exercise that.
Yes.
And so this fraught relationship that we have with power, I think, is partly a function of spending millennia not having power and having other people make decisions for us, despite us, and seeing power therefore as a negative thing. Yep. And so we desperately need role models who are wielding power in ways that is for the common public good, so that we change that dynamic in the way we think about it.
So I just was if you're watching the video, I just was jumping up and down because I agree. And I think there's an identity piece too, where when we don't identify with those with power, it's hard to see ourselves. We don't have a depth of role models. And I can speak from personal experience, having become a board chair a couple of years ago, and being in power. It's like anything else. It's a muscle that you got to practice and exercise. You're not going to get it right the first time. We know women don't like to not be good at things. So I had to let go of that. And I actually think my takeaway at the end was, I'm going to do leadership differently, and to give myself the grace and the space to kind of mess up and screw up a couple things, Shari, and go, whoops, that didn't work. But to give myself that compassion, because I know the next time I lead, I will be much further ahead. But that 32% you're talking about, or that, whatever the stats are on women as CEOs in Canada, maybe you have them closer to your grasp. We need more practice. Practice makes process happen.
Yeah, it certainly becomes easier the second time you do it, and the third time, and the visibility of other women operating in leadership positions is critical. There's a great story about Vigdis Finnbogadóttir, who was the president of Iceland for 16 years. And that meant an entire generation of us Icelandic kids had grown up only knowing
Right.
a female president. And when she retired and they were profiling a bunch of people to replace her on television, her grandson turned to her and said, "But grandma, they can't be president, they're men." And so his frame for what a president looked like was completely subverted by her reign. And women being Minister of Finance and Minister of Defense and all of those high profile roles is critical. And so that's another thing that's really valuable to remind women.
I want to take that and go a bit darker place, because I think it behooves us to talk about the dark side too. In a perfect world, we normalize this. We are 50%, 51% in a lot of cases of the visible faces that we see in the world and places of authority. You have an initiative at Informed Opinions called Toxic Hush, and there is a dark side to putting your face out there. So I'd love to hear what you notice about what's happening and how Informed Opinions is directly addressing that.
So I have to tell you that as a white woman, even though I've been getting hate mail since I started writing columns 30 years ago, I had no idea how brutal it is to be online as an advocate, as a journalist, as a politician, as somebody just who has a voice and is using it. If you are brown or Black or Indigenous or LGBTQ or Muslim or an immigrant. And a couple months into the pandemic, we convened a roundtable of women from equity deserving communities to say, we'd like to support more women in your networks to speak up. How can we do that? Thinking they were going to introduce us to women in their network. And they said, no, we don't want to do that because it's so brutal out there. And that was 3 months pandemic, and it has gotten much, much worse. So on social media, if you are advocating for something that's in any way controversial, if on top of the fact that you have an intersectional identity, the likelihood of you getting trolled and experiencing pushback is huge. And so what we're doing about that, we have a 3-pronged approach. We have the online Toxic Hush Action Kit, which is easy to find if you go to our website or just Google that, which is really just giving people insider information about how to protect yourself, what to do if you're trolled, how to fight back. That's one piece. The second piece, we're just launching this week, and this is a survey designed to collect data. So we're creating an app, but it's not ready yet. It's called Viro. And in the interim, what we're doing is collecting data that we're anonymizing and aggregating to be able to say to governments and the platforms themselves, this is how bad it is.
Right.
The people who are being attacked, this is the nature of the attacks that they're on the receiving end of. This is where it's happening on these platforms. To have data, it's easy to dismiss the experience of one woman, but to be able to show in aggregate, look, not only is this where it's happening, this who it's happening to, but this is the impact that it's happening. These women are self-silencing, self-censoring. They're going off social media. They are afraid for their children. We really need to understand the impact of this as an epidemic, because it is an epidemic. And then the third thing we're doing, we're launching on June 14th a People's Tribunal. And we have brought together 5 amazing, fearless women who are in politics or journalism or advocacy who have been targeted. They're talking about their experience, how they deal with it, why they continue to speak up despite that. We'll have 3 citizen judges who will provide a sort of overarching analysis of the policy and legal implications and the human rights abuses that this constitutes. So yeah, those are the 3 things that we to really force this issue onto the public agenda in a way that makes sure that it gets addressed.
Yeah. Wow. I applaud you for your work,
Yes.
Shari. It's so important. And I can't help as a professional fundraiser to put a plug in here that informedopinions.org is a charitable organization. And if this has prompted, inspired you, there's a lot of fighting here for me about this topic. The analogy I make was going to hear Michelle Obama speak, thinking this is going to be light and fluffy and, oh, this is going to be great. Actually, I brought my daughter. It was a wonderful day. I'm not discounting that part. But the piece that struck me, and I have never forgotten, is when the interviewer asked her, so what was the best thing about finishing at the White House? And she said that my family was safe and hadn't been attacked or killed.
Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah. It's terrible. It's terrible. And then no wonder she doesn't want to become president, right? It would just social media. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic. We won't go there.
But let's just talk about the sacrifice that these. I'm getting major, goosebumps. That these, like, that was the Black experience on top of the women's experience. The kind of sacrifice that these people made for others. And so, actually, where I'm sort of rolling this into is when the next time the phone rings, the next time you're asked to do something, if Michelle can do it, we can do it too.
Yeah, I had to not respond because it made me verklempt just contemplating what that must have been like. And we hear that in the tribunal on June 14th. You'll hear that not from Michelle Obama, but from women with much less power, much less protection, talking about why, as an Indigenous journalist, Brandy Morin continues to speak up and cover the stories that she does, and why it's so important. And, I think there are absolutely bad actors out there, and there are ways to deal with that. And there are motivations that inspired Barack Obama to run, Michelle Obama to support him, to be willing to be there, knowing that their presence, their visibility, to all the points that we've just made, make a difference and help shift attitudes and move people in different ways.
Can I quote you, Shari? This quote came to me yesterday when I was listening to you. If you are a woman and you are educated and knowledgeable in your field and you have the opportunity to speak and you don't, who is going to be speaking for women? Who is going to provide their perspective? That really hit me. And it's the word responsibility comes up. And I feel that you have this strong sense of responsibility and the invitation to other women, because I immediately said, yes, I am educated. I am knowledgeable. I do have opportunities to speak. Am I taking them all? And I was like, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not putting myself out. Not even maybe. I'm not putting myself out there. I'm not going all in, and I should be.
Well, for me, one of the primary impulses is that most women on the planet are never going to have the opportunity for an amplified voice. It's just not an option for them. I mean, in Canada, our gender gap tracker shows women's voices on average between 30 and 32%. And there are significant differences. It's important to point out, CBC is reliably over 40%. And the National Post is reliably under 20%. So, invest our news consumption in places that are reflecting our realities. But knowing that women's voices, and most women will never have the opportunity to speak up, those of us who do have those opportunities, not only should we take them, but we should kick the door wider so that the women whose voices are even less represented and whose realities are not being taken into account, that their voices have an opportunity to make a difference as well.
Yes.
I can get behind that 150%, Shari Graydon. Well, last question, and then we'll let you go onto your important work. We asked this at the end. I'm curious how you'll answer this. Shari, how are you going to make your next 50 years on this planet meaningful and valuable? And that's no discount on the first 50 years or whatever years, by the way.
On my 50th birthday, I spent driving from Kingston to Ottawa for a funeral,
Mm.
which was not really my ideal way to spend my 50th birthday, but I spent it in the car reflecting on everything I had done in the previous 30 years that I was proud of, and thinking about what would I like to accomplish in the next 30 if I was lucky enough to have them. And that was a couple of years before I started Informed Opinions. And I'm 60, I just turned 64 last week. And I feel like I have done more significant, important work, rewarding work, gratifying work in the last, well, really since I turned 50, 13 years, 14 years ago, than I did in the entire 50 years before that. So I'm going to continue to build on the work that we're doing, and to notice the profound difference that it makes to have women who know shit, who have informed opinions, get to share them. I genuinely believe that the intractable social, economic, and environmental problems that we face cannot be solved without women's voices being present and at the table. And so as long as people are willing to be in a room with me, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to share strategies and skills to help make that happen.
You are so inspiring, Shari, because I had a birthday, I turned 51, and that's been on my mind. How will I make these next years more impactful than they were? And it's so inspiring that you've done all of this after your 50th birthday.
And
Thank
it's
you
never,
so much.
never too late.
Never.
Get clear. Go for it, right?
Can I tell you one last quick story?
Of course.
So I started Informed Opinions in 2009, and then I had this idea that I would invite a whole bunch of women I knew to share their insights about the benefits of being over 50, because the media was full of reminders about how it's all over but the weeping once you get gray hair and have wrinkles. And so I curated this collection of essays called I Feel Great About My Hands. And I was in Victoria, and I was talking to my former mother-in-law's sister, who was in her 80s at the time, and I was telling her about my book. And she said, very sweetly, but she said, "Shari, what do you know about aging?" Because I was 51.
You're so young. You're so young. You haven't got there
I'm
yet.
64, and I really understand what she was saying, because 64 is different than 50. And I've been through the process of supporting my 90-year-old parents in transitions. So yeah, you keep learning. I love the name of your podcast. I love that you're focusing on the next 50. And I think we're so much smarter and wiser and more aware of our privilege, of our opportunities, of our limitations. And that's actually a really great, great, great place to be. So kudos to both of you for focusing.
Thank you so much for coming on our show today, Shari. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. If you would like to hear more about Shari, you can go to her website. It is sharigraydon.com, as well as informedopinions.org. There is a place to put your name into the website and get on the list of speakers. And yes, Jenny and I
We're on it.
Pinky promise.
Pinky
We're
promise.
on that list. We're on that list. And thank you so much.
Yeah.
My great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much for including me.
So listeners, we will be back in our next episode with another interesting, fascinating. I almost feel like these are, anchor points for me as a woman. Sylvia and I get to come together and record these amazing sessions. They bring inspiration. Sometimes we're doing a little bit of co-coaching. If you've enjoyed this, if something about this really landed for you, please don't hesitate to forward this episode to someone in your network, someone who might just really appreciate hearing this today. Some of those smart, intelligent women that Shari was talking about today. And at that point, Sylvia, I guess we'll say goodbye.
Yes, we'll see you next time. Again, as always, thank you for your 5-star reviews and your testimonies. and just the love that you always
Yep.
give us on the show. We will catch you next time. And here's to your next 50. Bye, everyone.